Hello, my name is Rick Houston, and welcome to the Same Vault Podcast. Folks, these past few days they've been emotional, truly emotional. It is hard to describe what it is like watching firsthand as the laps wound down on Steve Waid's life. I was with Steve and his wife, Margaret, as he took those last few breaths yesterday. And a few minutes earlier, I couldn't help but laugh and tell him that we had come a long way from the first time we met all those years ago in August of 1990, when he wouldn't even let me pass the front entrance of the Winston Cup Scene offices. He basically patted me on the head and sent me on my way. And then when we did work together at Winston Cup Scene, I can't say that we even knew each other that well then. He was the boss. And let's just say that I was quite a few rungs down the ladder. I just considered myself lucky to even be on the ladder. No matter how low it was, it didn't matter to me. I was happy to be working for Winston Cup Scene. But over the course of the nearly 8 years that we worked together here on the Same Vault Podcast, he became one of my best friends. He became family. He was a confidant. He was the one that I vented to when things didn't go the way that I thought that they should be going. But that's fine. He was there, and he was patient. He was the guy that I was still trying to impress, so that maybe, just maybe, his and Deb Williams' decision to hire me all those years ago was justified after all. This is the episode that I knew that I would more than likely be putting together one day, but absolutely dreaded the very thought of it. I've pulled together what amounts to an episode of This Is Your Life for Steve, straight from the Same Vault Podcast archives. There were several stories that I wanted to include. I just couldn't. Over the course of, a little more than 400 episodes now, I just simply couldn't find them. I wanted to include how I came to be tagged by Steve with the nickname Sasquatch. I know we talked about it. I know that we talked about it very early because that's been around for a long time now. Not quite day one on the podcast, but it was pretty early. I wanted to find his description of my pursuit of my first Major League Baseball foul ball. And I also wanted to include the time that he told me during a job review that I should have kicked a fellow Winston Cup Scene employee's ass. That was a good memory, but I couldn't find it. I'll keep looking. But Steve, until then, this one's for you. And as a reminder, this show is not affiliated in any way with American City Business Journal's owner of the same brand. Steve and I met for lunch in January 2018 to talk about the Scene archive. And over the course of the next few months, I mentioned the possibility of doing a NASCAR history podcast. Steve agreed to be my first guest on the show. And to be honest, I figured that would be it. We had not talked about doing anything together past that first interview. I packed up my podcast recording equipment and took it down to Steve's house in Charlotte. And I thought that was a big deal because that was Steve Waid's house. And I was going to get to go to Steve's house. But as I was setting up in his office, I had forgotten the cable that connected my soundboard to my laptop. I was so embarrassed, but I came back the next day. We recorded our conversation, and the rest really is history. Here is Steve from that first episode talking about his journey from Martinsville to Roanoke and finally to Scene.
I had gone to work for the Martinsville Bulletin, my first newspaper job. And I was told that I'd be covering the fall race at Martinsville Speedway. Well, I was terrified. I mean, I didn't know anything about NASCAR, about stock car racing. I'd only heard of Richard Petty and Cale Yarborough. Those are only names I knew.
Okay.
But I was very fortunate because, like so many of us, I discovered a mentor at Martinsville Speedway, Stick Thompson. At the time, the PR director of the Speedway, and he was until his death. And he realized that for Martinsville to gain the most out of their local publication, the writer had to know the sport. So he took me under his wing. and he took me down into the pits, and he introduced me to every driver that we came upon, even the ones that nobody knew.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a quick, interesting story. Most of them were very polite, said hello, how are you? I was introduced to Richard Petty.
Who?
Richard Petty.
Never heard of him.
Let me play it again. Richard Petty. And he reached out, shook my hand, and tapped me on the shoulder and said, welcome. If I can help you in any way, you let me know. That was my first inkling of the kind of man he was. But after that introduction and to the sport by Dick, and who taught me a lot, I felt more comfortable. And I was fortunate enough to enjoy covering races at Martinsville for as long as I was there, which was only 18 months before I got a phone call from Roanoke, Virginia, a much bigger paper, of course. They covered everything in the state, and NASCAR, and the Washington Redskins, and the Baltimore Colts. And boy, I was in the major league now. And I started with Roanoke. I covered my first race of them in Atlanta, the first time I'd ever gone to Atlanta, and stayed there for 10 years and really enjoyed my time in Roanoke. And that's when I got to spread my wings, so we say, as a motorsports writer, by going to places as far away as Michigan when Richard Petty debuted his Chevrolet up there. That's another funny story. But in any case, I'd heard of Grand National Scene during that time. We fellow motorsports journalists and I sort of snickered at it. I mean,
did you really?
Oh, yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah, well, the way it was being sold. It was found by a fellow named Robert E. Griggs, Jr., out of Alabama. And we could watch him in the infield at Talladega, hawking that paper, walking around, holding it up. It was only a quarter, trying to sell that paper. Well, that seemed pretty funny to me, and I was one of those who thought that he'd never make it doing that sort of stuff. Well, lo and behold, he got bigger and bigger. And he called me one day and he said, would it be all right if I used your carbons of your columns? Back then, worked on a typewriter, and you didn't have
a what?
Typewriter. You used your fingers.
And what is this thing called a typewriter?
Well, it had no screen to it, I'll tell you that. No print. In any case, you used carbon paper to make your copy, make sure you had a copy in addition to the one you sent back to your paper. Boy, I'm dating myself here. He asked me if he could use my carbons. In other words, obviously it would appear in the wrong paper first, but he would get a chance to use it in his paper. Said he'd pay me $25 per carbon. Well, I said, I wasn't doing any extra work for him, and $25 back then.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that would do you well. So
that was almost as much as you paid me for my first freelance.
It was too much. But in any case, I started doing that for him, and it went like in 78, I think I started, and 78, 79, 80, I kept doing it, and the price kept increasing the price. $50, $75, $100. So I thought, he was on the up and up. At least he was honest with me.
Right.
And, of course, I was getting the paper for free and looking at it, and he had done some things correctly, I assumed, like using Gene Granger, at the time one of the most notorious motorsports muckrakers there was out there. He was out of Spartanburg, and he had that reputation, and he was well known. And he was not afraid of calling a spade, shall we say.
Right.
So I said, he had him. That was good. Well, finally, in 1981, Griggs gave me a call, and I went down to Concord, North Carolina, to see him. And he offered me a job as the quote-unquote executive editor of the paper. And I said, you can't afford me. I wasn't being smart. I was just saying, at the time, I didn't think he could afford nearly as much money as I would require, which wasn't a lot, trust me.
Right.
But you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
So he said, when I can, I'll call you back. I said, okay. He called me back in a month, and he offered me the same amount of money that I was making in Roanoke. Plus, he would pay my moving expenses. So I thought it over and talked it over with my family, and I had to come to the realization that I was always going to be a sports writer in Roanoke, never an editor.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I'll take it. So I went down there and I took the job, and I came into my office. The first day as office was a converted country store.
Well, that is one of the questions that I wanted to ask. I think from the way that you described it, you kind of had a culture shock.
Oh, a big time.
Coming from Roanoke in a nice new modern building, working on computers.
Right.
And you walk
cars.
Yeah, you walk into this converted country store and you tell a great story about your inbox.
Yeah. I'll tell you, when I looked at where I was to work, I had one of these metal desks, one of these old-time Royal typewriters, and a chicken wire inbox. That's it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that chair I got came from some surplus store somewhere, or whatever the case may be. And just like you mentioned, I thought about it. I looked at it and I said, what the heck have I done? I mean, here I leave this beautiful marble 4-story office building in Roanoke, where I had a company car, I had an expense account, I was making good money, and computers were starting to come in, and everything of that nature, and here I am in this. So, to be honest with you, I was kind of worried that I had done the wrong thing. But as time went on, I found out that it was the right thing, because we started growing and moving to new buildings and adding staff as we progressed. And in the final stages of my tenure with Scene, all right, we not only had company cars, we were in a brand new building out in Concord that Griggs had built himself. It was custom made. Plus, in the back, we had a full-blown photo studio.
Yeah.
That could handle race cars and everything else. So this was the culmination of what Griggs promised me years before. And I had to tell myself at that particular time, hey, this is good. For materialistic purposes, it was good. But it was also better another way. And you can imagine what that is, that the quality of the staff and the publication that we put out made Scene the Bible of NASCAR stock car racing, and I was proud of that.
At what point did you get over the feeling of, oh my gosh, what have I done? How long did it take?
It took about 2 years.
Really?
The reason I say that is because when I came down there, Griggs told me, he said, stick with me. We're going to grow. We're going to make this paper work. And we will have everything that the other companies have before long. We will have company cars. We will have full-blown expense accounts. We will go to races everywhere. And just trust me. Well, after 2 years, I found out that's exactly what we were doing. And we got the first of our company cars. Not that company cars is a big deal, but you understand it is something that relieves you of your own expenses. You don't have to pay for the upkeep of your car. So that was a sign to me that things were working out. And so I felt more comfortable at the end of the second year than I did, obviously, when I got there. And my title was executive editor, and I was making decisions, but I also wrote. I was helping people cover every race that we went to at that particular time. So I was still more or less still a writer. And that was also a very good feeling. But like I said earlier, the growth of the paper was exponential. By the time 3 or 4 seasons had gone by, we could see the path ahead of us, that it was very clear.
Well, the thing that I respect about Grand National Scene's place in the sport, Winston Cup Scene's place in the sport, is its growth kind of paralleled the sports growth.
Yeah.
And, I think that Scene
had a big part in that. And one of the things I did want to talk to you about was how you feel those two went hand in hand, the growth of the sport and the growth of the paper.
That was the key to the growth of Scene, was the growth of the sport. We had latched ourselves on to a star. As the sport grew, we were able to grow. And then as we grew, we never neglected what we needed to do for ourselves. In other words, we needed equipment, we were able to get it. We needed transportation, we were able to get it. Most important, we were able to get quality people. That's what set us apart from the other trade papers of the day, that we targeted and got people who had already established themselves either in the sport or with their talent, and were able to bring them on board. So the quality of the staff of Scene always was high, and that, to me, was a significant factor in the growth and the popularity of the newspaper as well.
While Steve was still at Martinsville, the legendary track founder Clay Earls and Dick Thompson, the track's PR guru, and they made sure to introduce Steve to a friend of theirs that they felt he needed to know in order to make it in big-time automobile racing.
What kind of man was Clay Earls? The president of the racetrack.
He too knew that in order for his track to be well exposed, I had to know something about racing. And so he too took me under his wing. So much so, then a couple of years afterwards, when I traveled to races, I would travel with Clay and Dick and stay in the same motel and everything. Clay was a very determined man with a colorful background. He was a very hardline businessman, had produced successful businesses in and around Martinsville and Henry County. He was also something of a rogue.
Now we're getting somewhere. Do tell.
He also made money through illegal shipments of moonshine. He never admitted it, but most folks knew it anyway. He also was a gambler, a master poker player. And he finally told me, he said, I had to quit playing poker because I was taking away a man's earnings and taking food out of his children's mouth. I had to quit. And that's how good he was at it. And he showed me some of the things that made him good. I was in awe of that. Traveling with Clay and learning from him and Dick, and I might add, they were not always talking about their speedway. They were talking about racing in general and things I needed to know. One of the great stories about Clay was he told me more than once that I was going to have to know a guy named Sam Clay if I was going to get ahead in the sport. He said, you have to know this guy. Believe me, he will help your career. So one time we were at Rockingham, the phone in my motel room rang, and it was Clay. He said, you got to come up here. Sam Clay is here. Oh, man. I grabbed my notebook. I grabbed my pen. I even combed my hair. And I went up to Clay's room. Yeah, I did.
You combed your hair.
To meet Sam Clay. I knocked on the door of Clay's room. He opened the door wide and with a sweep of his arm, pointed to the center of the room and said, come on and meet Sam Clay. And there on the table was a fifth of cheap Kentucky bourbon, Sam Clay. I never saw Clay Earls laugh so hard in all his life.
Well, you had me wondering who Sam Clay was.
Steve covered his first Daytona 500 in 1972. Let's just say that the trip down to Florida that year was as memorable as A.J. Foyt's victory in the race itself.
Steve, your column in this issue was about your very first trip to Daytona. Now, take me through that odyssey.
Well,
okay?
It snowed virtually all over the South. And I left in a pile of snow and ice. As a matter of fact, as I got down to the bottom of the hill from my house, my car did a 360. And I said, I'm off to a really good start. Well, to make a long story short, I was on Interstate 95, and the only lane that was open, you could just see 2 tire marks through the snow. Everything else was snow. And I thought to myself, I'm in real trouble here, because if I have to get off and get gas, I'll never get up the ramp, and I'll never get back down the ramp. So I was driving 25 miles an hour on the interstate. Finally, I got to Georgia, and all the snow turned to water. Thank the Lord. But the other part of the story is Interstate 95 was not complete through Georgia into Florida. You had to get off and you had to get on Highway 17. And that was a 2-lane road that went through
Oh,
every
man.
single town and
Good
hamlet.
night.
Oh, it's just terrible. Chico's Donkey Farm on the right, stuff like that. Finally got past all of that and finally got my way into Daytona at 9 o'clock at night after leaving at 6 o'clock that morning. Took
Good
me
night.
15 hours to make that trip, twice as long as it should have. You talk about tired. I'm telling you the truth.
Another early introduction for Steve was Buddy Arrington, who was based right there in Martinsville. He lived and worked. His shop was in Martinsville, and you had better believe that Steve had some Buddy Arrington stories.
I was an absolute Cub sports writer in my first job at the Martinsville Bulletin. Well, Buddy is from Martinsville, lived there. He had his home there and his shop there. One day, I got a call.
Listeners, you might want to kick back for a minute.
Well, the voice on the phone said, "This is Buddy Arrington. I got a brand new car. I'm going to take to Daytona. Why don't you come out here and see it and take some pictures and stuff?" And I sort of stammered and carried on because I'd never heard of Buddy Arrington. And I said, okay, and hung up the phone. Now, I made a big mistake. I didn't know where Buddy lived or worked, number one, and there was no Google back then. And number two, there was no caller ID back then. So I'm in real trouble. I promised to go out to Buddy's shop and write about his new car and take pictures of it. I don't know where the heck he is. So I didn't know what I was going to do. Finally, I took it on myself to look in the phone book. And think about that. Who looks in the phone book today? You look at it online, maybe. But I did find Buddy's name and address and his phone number, and I called him. Yeah, he told me how to get over to his place, and I went over there, and I was absolutely fascinated because, Buddy had not only had a nice Dodge that he was going to run at Daytona, but his garage at his house at the lower level, and he had 5 or 6 pristine condition Chrysler box.
Did he really?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
And, he just collected them. So I had to think to myself, this guy must be, doing very, very well. That's before I ran into the Richard Pettys and the David Pierce and the Wood Brothers. So that was my start. That's the first thing I ever did for a publication with a racing theme in it at all. And Buddy and I remained friends from that time until the time each of us, basically retired. And there's another story. This one probably isn't as pleasant, but it is funny in its own way, and it is true. At Talladega one year, there were only 2 cars at the track late in a practice session. One of them was Buddy's, and the other was Dean Dalton's. All right, Dean Dalton's another one of those independent drivers. So Dean goes into the first turn, and for some reason he spins out, and his car goes up to the top of the track and rests against the wall. Now, here comes Buddy out of the third turn, down the, tribal, headed to the first turn. And all of a sudden, inexplicably, Dean's car comes off the wall in the first turn.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Starts sliding down the track. I mean, it had been up there for, it seemed like forever. And it slides down the track, and Buddy just can't avoid it. And he gets into a wreck. And he's taken to the hospital. Well, I was on my way to Talladega and had not gotten there yet. So when I got into my room, I picked up a phone, and I called the hospital, and lo and behold, they let me through to him. I didn't think that was going to happen. And Buddy sounded terrible.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
He said, he was just feeling real bad and sore, and I just can't talk to you right now, but I'll talk to you as soon as I can. I said, okay, but that's fine. We'll do that. He handed his phone over to the orderly or the male nurse or whoever he was and said, well, I have to give Mr. Arrington his bath right now. And he hung up. Well, how do I phrase this next part? At the track, a rumor was circulating around the garage area that in the accident, Buddy had lost his manhood.
I did not laugh at that. Really?
Oh, now
now that reminds me of a story.
I didn't laugh at it either, but I said to myself, well, you're a newspaper man. You got to find out what's going on. So
now,
once again,
how are you going to ask that question?
Once again, I called the hospital. And once again, miraculously, they let me through to Buddy. And I said, Buddy, Now, he wasn't sounding as pained as he was yesterday. He was sounding much better. So I knew there couldn't be anything to the rumor. Buddy, I got to ask you something. He said, no, it ain't true. My thing wasn't cut off. So,
Steve, that's either going to give us 1 million new listeners or that's going to end us forever.
I hope Buddy doesn't hear it.
Here's the just absolutely crazy thing that honestly I have a really hard time wrapping my arms around. Steve didn't just write about NASCAR history, he lived it. He was there for so many of the sport's most famous moments. 1976 Daytona 500, David Pearson and Richard Petty. 1979 Daytona 500, Cale Yarborough, Donnie Allison, Bobby Allison, and oh yeah, Richard Petty wins the race. 1984, Firecracker 400, Richard Petty beats Cale Yarborough to the caution flag and goes on to win the 200th race of his career. Let's start in 1976.
Steve, there's so much from that interview that we could talk about, but I did want to start off with the 1976 Daytona 500. Yeah, he could have backed off.
Sure, yeah. You can see David Pearson backing off of anything. At that particular point of the race, when you're going for the, everybody knows, when you're going for the win, it's no holds barred.
Going for the win in the Daytona 500.
Especially in the Daytona 500. That type of finish where David crashed and Richard crashed, both got into each other and then hit the wall and then spun toward the infield. And David stopped in the pit road. Richard stopped 100 feet from the finish line. Now, Richard's engine was dead, but David had the sense to keep his foot in the clutch. And as a result, he could restart his engine, which he did. And I don't think he went more than 25 miles an hour just chugging through that infield, ever so close to the finish line, and finally getting on the track right at the finish line and curving, heading to the first turn and winning the race. Meanwhile, Richard has to get pushed to the finish line by his crew. Finish is not allowed. NASCAR says last lap you cannot have your car pushed to the checkered flag, and so that wasn't allowed. But David, of course, took advantage of the situation that he created by keeping his foot in the clutch. And you got to admit, how many drivers would think about that in a wreck like that? I know it's not all of them would. Richard didn't, and it made all the difference in that race. And it made all the difference to me, too, because I sat up there in the press box after seeing this. I had never seen anything like this up to that point in my career. And I thought, gosh, this is going to be one whale of a story. Problem was, I couldn't write it. I sat there after the race is over, and David had left. He didn't make too many comments. He never did at that time. And I'm hearing typewriters, you remember typewriters, of course, clacking all the way around. The guy's just pounding these stories, and I'm sitting there. I can't write. I can't come up with a lead for this story. I think, okay, I'll start off, let's see. Well, they wrecked, period. No, they didn't. And I think it was a good 30 minutes before I could finally get a lead paragraph on that story. And it didn't come so difficult after that. But I sent the story back to Roanoke. I was working the Roanoke Times at the time. And I thought, well, I'll know by tomorrow morning if I got a job or not. Well, apparently I saved my job. Apparently it was okay with them, the story that they got. So, but I have never since had a problem like that in putting a story on paper. That's how riveting that finish was.
When I was going through the interview process at Winston Cup Scene, I asked recently retired Winston Cup director Dick Beatty if he could possibly put in a good word for me with Deb and Steve, and he said he would. And he added, I'll talk to Tom Higgins, too. And at the time, I didn't know the connection between Steve and Tom. And I told Dick, but Tom Higgins doesn't work for Winston Cup Scene. To which Dick replied, Tom Higgins and Steve Waid breathe out of the same damn lung. And Tom, he first entered the picture later in 1976.
Well, it was back at the Southern 500 in Darlington in 1976. Now, down there at that time, one of the major stories in NASCAR's history broke. This is a time when the independent, low-finance drivers are getting tired of losing money. They weren't making any money in racing. They banded together and announced they were going to have a revolution. Boy, they were going to, if things didn't change, they were going to leave. Well, that story was all over the place at Darlington. There was one problem. Tom Higgins wasn't there. he was tending to a family matter in Charlotte. So, in the media center, right in front of me, I saw a group of his newspaper rivals corner a Charlotte Speedway official and say to him that if he gave any information about what was going on to Tom Higgins, they were going to have his job. Now, this was right in front of me. I'd never seen anything like it. I guess I was pretty much ignored because I was just, almost a rookie. I'd been on very long. But I was basically a kid, and I don't think they really had any impression of me whatsoever. But unbeknownst to them, I had the story outright cold, and I got it. Well, I was pretty lucky. One of my friends in racing was James Hilton. And as we all know by now, James Hilton was the ringleader of that entire operation. He told me everything. So by golly, the Royal paper had the full story, courtesy of James. But the next day when Tom came down, of course, he didn't have a big part of that story. Now, he was an excellent reporter, and he found out enough to get the Observer something, but it didn't have a lot of meat to it. I saw him come into the media center, and I had never spoken to him. Now, I knew who he was, of course, but I had never spoken to him. So I came up, I introduced myself, and I gave him my story, and I gave him my notes and everything else, and said, this will help you catch up to what everybody is doing. That was it. Tom thanked me, and I didn't have a chance to speak to him the rest of the day. But that night, I was in my motel room, cheap motel room, I might add, and there came a knock at the door. And I opened the door, and there stood Tom Higgins. How he found me, I don't know. But he stood there, he looked at me, he pointed at me, and he said, you are riding with me. And we rode together for the next 25 years.
Steve, I'm going to use a Mike Helton phrase here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But at the end of the day,
okay,
how would you like for Tom to be remembered?
The way I'd like for him to be remembered is the way he's going to be remembered. Remembered as an excellent newspaperman, a great storyteller, and just a great individual altogether. And that's what Tom was. Came to the newspapers, he got the scoops, he got the stories. It came to entertainment. He taught me one thing about working in racing. And I thought it was a pretty good lesson. If you are out there reporting, the facts and the news is one thing, okay? People want to know about the people in racing. Every one of these people in the garage area, a crewman, a crew chief, a driver, they all have their own story. And so let's go find out what they got to say and tell their stories. And that's one thing that Tom and I worked together on, and one thing that I've learned from him that I spent my whole career trying to do. So if you put all that together, I think you pretty much have the consummate reporter and the consummate storyteller.
From that point on, many, if not most, or even all of Steve's best memories in the sport involved Pappy in some way. Courtesy of Kyle Petty, this is the story behind their infamous Knights of the Mystic Sea poster.
Can I ask Steve a question? Just one question real quick. Okay, so speaking of how the sport changes, and speaking of writers, and speaking of stuff, so we used to have a thing at where we put the cars together, where we assembled the cars, and there was a wall, and it was just to the left of where we kept all the parts, so in that one bay, and on that wall, when you'd win races, we'd come in and they'd tack up the flag. Because you get the flag, but those were nice flags. I mean, they had the embroidery 76, on the ball on it and all that stuff. Right in the middle of that was a poster, and it was framed, and it was a nice poster, but it was always hung in the middle, just like this photo or picture here, with all these winning flags around it from whatever year we raced. And it was, I believe it was the Knights of the Mystic Sea. And it hung on that wall. So please, Steve Waid, explain to me what the Knights of the Mystic Sea were.
Oh, dear.
It started by Joe Whitlock.
Okay.
Years ago. Tom and I were staying in a motel called the Mystic Sea. Motel.
Nice place.
I'm not sure I like where this
Nice
is going.
place.
No, it's no longer that. But in any case, Joe found out about it, and he said, "You guys are the Knights of the Mystic Sea." Now, that's a takeoff on Amos and Andy.
Yes.
They were the Mystic Knights of the Sea.
Yes.
Well, we thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I said, we got to do something about this. So we sat and thought and talked about it, and finally we're pretty well tanked up and walked outside the hotel door in Talladega. And I said, got an idea. Let's pose like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and take a picture.
I know.
I said, okay.
I love that poster. I loved it, man.
Okay, but we got to dress it up a little bit. So we put on our suits, leisure suits.
Leisure suits, man. Leisure. That's exactly right.
And threw a bunch of trash.
It always looked like you were on a trash dump to me. That's what I remember. I thought you'd just gone to the garbage dump to take the picture. That's what I didn't understand.
So we sat and had the picture taken. And when we got a hold of the picture, I said, this is great. We got to do something with this. So I showed it to T. Wayne Robinson. And he forked over $500 of Winston's money to print 500 posters.
Yep.
So we got those posters and said, this is, wow. So we just took them. I thought the first track we went to back was at Charlotte. And we took them down in the garage area and just started handing them out.
Yeah.
The next thing we knew, they were in the back of trailers.
Yes.
They were all over. Harry Hyde had one. Y'all had
Yeah,
one.
we had one. Ours was framed, man. Ours
Yeah.
was framed. We took the
Mine's
time to
framed.
frame ours. That's the best part about
we went
it.
to North Wilkesboro and we went to a tavern in North Wilkesboro. And I just brought him in for the heck of it. And I asked the bartender, can you put this on the wall? He did. And he said, wow, everybody in the tavern wanted the poster.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, they thought they were Seals and Crofts.
This podcast is going downhill
They
fast.
thought they were a singing group. They thought they were
We
a
went
singing
through
group.
miles of people thinking we were Seals and Crofts,
Yeah.
all notes.
That's it. There's a
Just
singing group.
another
That's
group.
it.
One girl asked us,
man.
you know, are you boys gospel
Yeah.
groups? You know?
No.
No. That's good. That's good, man. I had to bring that up. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Sorry, we gave away.
Yeah, that was good, man.
We had to print another 500 of
Yeah,
them.
that was good.
Do you have any posters left?
No, there's no way, man.
I got one that's framed. Now, with today's technology, you can take it out of the frame and make them all over.
Yeah, shoot you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you
Okay.
Make a T-shirt out of it would be better.
Okay. All right.
Here's Steve on the 1979 Daytona 500.
To me, the best press box story came out of the 1979 Daytona 500. Now, everybody knows.
Oh, this should be good.
Oh, everybody knows the circumstances. And it's coming down to the end of the race as Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison scrapping for the lead go past the start-finish line under us and start heading in the second turn. Then they start beating and banging down the back stretch. And we're just all trying to see as best we can. And I got up and put one foot on the table behind me and one foot on my own table. And here I am balancing myself precariously because I'm trying to see what's going to happen. And all of a sudden, they disappear. They disappear into the third turn, infield. We can't see anything. It just hits me. I see Richard take the lead. I said, Richard's going to win the race. Richard's going to win the race. And old Tom Higgins is sitting beside me and says, to hell with that. I want to see that fist fight coming up.
He called it.
Sure enough, Ken Squire comes booming over the PA and there's a fight in third turn.
Yeah, and there's a fight.
That was quite a wild day in the press box because after that race, we were all at a loss. How we going to explain this to our readers, you know?
Now, how am I going to compete with the 1979 Daytona 500, man?
You never knew quite where Steve was going to turn up next. Over the course of his career, he did a race or two or three or four in the television broadcast booth. Here he is in a commentary about North Wilkesboro from MRN.
North Wilkesboro Speedway is the oldest track on the Winston Cup circuit. It began running NASCAR events in 1947, but as you might guess, they weren't anything like they are today. The old hulking coupes and sedans were the race cars of the track's infancy, and the races themselves weren't much more than match events among the moonshine runners of the day. Junior Johnson, the racing team owner who hails from nearby Ingle Hollow and has been around North Wilkesboro races from the beginning, recalls fondly those early days. Fans would come to the track to watch their local heroes bash it out in the same cars they used to escape the revenue agents. According to Junior, the drivers would jump in their whiskey cars, take a long piece of rope to tie themselves in, and get on with it. Races were bump and thump, crash and wreck, with the winner more times than not being a survivor. For years, this was a style of competition that characterized North Wilkesboro, and the fans loved it. What a way to spend a weekend. To this day, fans make up a lot of the color which surrounds North Wilkesboro. You probably won't find a more knowledgeable bunch anywhere else on the circuit. They can tell you about Red Byron, Gwen Staley, Curtis Turner, and Joe Weatherly. Their loyalties were intense, which meant if you didn't agree that Junior Johnson was the toughest driver who ever lived, you might be in for a fistfight. Junior himself recalls the tale in which two rather rowdy good old boys took exception to one another's loyalties and began duking it out in the infield restroom, or outhouse as it was. There was no plumbing in those days, and when the two got to swinging and rolling around in that outhouse, well, you can imagine what they got into. A local deputy finally separated them and put them in a squad car for transportation to the jail. Before the deputy could drive away, however, he had to lower all four windows of his car. With a big bellow laugh, Junior said that the car was never fragrance-free after that, and it ultimately had to be sold. Richard Petty has won more races at North Wilkesboro, 15, than any other driver, so you know he's been around to see a great deal of what went on. He, too, smiles when he talks about yesterday at the track. At the start of a race, Petty said, the fans would be scrapping in the fourth turn area of a grandstand. Midway through the event, they'd be going to it at the start-finish line, and near the end, the first turn would be the site of all the action. Drivers spent as much time watching the fans as the fans spent watching them. One particular incident which stands out in Petty's mind concerned a couple of roughnecks who had pinned down an adversary at the start-finish line. Back in the old days, only a wall and a chicken wire fence separated the cars from the fans. Now, these old boys had found a gap in the chicken wire and were sticking the body of their unfortunate foe through it. He dangled over the wall helplessly until the cars came speeding up on him. Then the boys would yank him back, out and in, sort of like a yo-yo. It went on for several laps, and Petty admitted that even he had to laugh. And Petty also tells the story about a guy who got tired of being beat up by an ill-tempered bunch in the infield. So he went to his car and produced a hand grenade. He wasn't touched after that. The stories about North Wilkesboro are plentiful, and they go on to this day. While it was only a scant few years ago that a race was postponed because of worms. You heard right. A torrential rain had brought out the wiggly things, and there were so many on the track it was impossible to clean them up before race day. Today, racing in North Wilkesboro is still as rough and tumble as it always was. There will be plenty of crushed sheet metal before the Northwestern Bank 400 is over. And the fans, well, perhaps they're not as physical as they used to be, but you never know. You do know, however, that they like their racing and their drivers. So even though North Wilkesboro Speedway has moved into the modern age of racing, it still has that tinge of days gone by, and it's likely that it'll never lose it. This is Steve Waid speaking.
Here's the Steve and Pappy Show again, live from Daytona, this time for the 1984 Firecracker 400.
Steve, you were there that day. Tell me about what it meant to the sport to have President Ragan there, regardless of what happened at the end of the race.
It was huge because it granted the sport and NASCAR tremendous national coverage. I can remember that for the first time, there were actually representatives of national news outlets at Daytona. The Washington Post, New York Times, those types of people showed up to see what went on in the race, and obviously to see how President Ragan was treated at the race and what the response would be. And it was just absolutely tremendous all the way around.
Do you remember the interview that Ned did with President Ragan?
Yeah, parts of it. First of all, President Ragan had done his homework. And he said to Ned, Ned, I understand you have two sons who are now getting into racing. Of course, he was talking about Glenn and Dale. And, yes, sir, Mr. President, Ned answered him, said, I'm very proud of him. And then Ned said back to President Ragan, I understand you were a sports announcer in your earlier days. Do you want to take us to the end of the race here?
Well, the blue car is going around the white car, and the white car's...
No, President Reagan, no, not me.
The fact that President Ragan was there was one thing, and that was very special. And, of course, he had given the command to fire engines from Air Force One and all that kind of thing. But then, for the race to end up like it did with Richard Petty winning his 200th race in a heck of a finish with Cale Yarborough, That was just almost too much to ask for.
Well, it was just like Hollywood. I mean, you couldn't have gotten a script for a finish like that from Hollywood. They would have thought it just too incredible. But it turned out they were side by side coming out of the fourth turn, heading down the dog leg to the finish line, but the caution came out. And everybody thinks that's when the race ended. No, it was one more lap to go. The caution came out because Doug Heveron spun out in the first turn.
And flipped.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when Richard beat Cale to the caution, there was still one more lap to go, but effectively the race was over. And what happened then is kind of unusual, too. Richard came around the track under caution, everybody cheering because they knew he'd won, and Cale peeled off.
Pulled a Mark Martin.
Yeah, he peeled off and went down to the pits. Harry Gant took second place because Cale did that. And I talked to Cale about that a little while afterwards, and he says, that's my most embarrassing moment in racing ever. And he said, I can't believe I did that. But he did. And he gave up second place to Harry Gant. And Richard, of course, won his 200th race in front of the president and was immediately taken up the track and through the crowd up to the press box to speak to President Reagan.
Now, Steve, we were talking before we started recording, and you said that you had a story about this race. I got to hear another Steve Waid story.
Okay.
True or not?
Well, this one is definitely true. It starts the morning of the race, and several of us media types were heading into the gate and go up to the press box. Well, there at the gate was a big black tent, and black tarp, covered the stairway heading up to the press box. I thought, what in the world is this? So we ran into that tent, and there was the Secret Service. They made every one of us open up our briefcases and open up our computer bags. And back in those days, there was all kinds of computers. Some were big, some were little, but everybody had to put it on the table and let the Secret Service look at it. Now, one guy, I won't say his name.
Oh, you got to name names.
No.
Come on, man.
One guy started grousing about the whole thing, about complaining. He went in and said, the government this and the government that, and why are we having to go through this, and why are we having to go through that? He was saying this while he was standing in line. Two Secret Servicemen came up and took him out of that line and into a corner of the tent.
Hello.
Yes. I don't know what all they did to him, but I can tell you, it took 30 more minutes before he ever showed up at the press box. And turns out he said they did everything to him. They made him drop out everything in his pockets.
Drop his what?
No. Drop out his pockets. And, of course, look through his briefcase and look through his computer, just with flashlights and everything. He was there for 30, 40 minutes before he was allowed to get to the press box. Now, in the press box, there were several Secret Service agents. And when you left the press box for any reason, you had to tell one of them where you were going and why you were going. So sometime during the race, I had to use the men's room. So I went up and said to the Secret Service man, sir, I have to use the men's room. Do you really want to know why? He shook his head. No, he was a nice guy. So that's what you had to do, though. You could not leave the press box without telling a Secret Service man what you were doing.
It's funny that you mentioned the searching of the bags, because at that time that was certainly out of the ordinary. Now
is a routine.
Yeah, that's just standard. Obviously, at the airport, I covered the NCAA Final Four for NCAA.com several years ago, and our bags were searched before we went into the main media room. It certainly was a different time.
Yes, it was. And to give you an idea of the mood that was in the press box, it wasn't somber. I mean, we accepted the fact that a president comes with his own security, and there's nothing you can do about it. Just take it. Well, we were sort of joking about it as the race went on, and it turned out that at one point of the race, Ken Ragan, who's David Reagan's father, his car started smoking, and Tom Higgins, my buddy,
Pappy, what did you do?
Oh, he got real mischievous. He tapped me on the shoulder and said, watch this. And he yelled out real loud, oh, my God, Reagan's blown. And I said, what did you say? In that press box, I ducked under my desk.
Oh, my Lord.
I said, I knew we were going to jail. But surprisingly, nothing happened, so he got away with it. But can you imagine yelling, "Reagan's blown," with the president in the in the next stall? I mean, that's crazy.
Oh, wow. Now, let me ask you this. Could you see him? Where was he actually during the race?
Yeah, he was in the radio booth right next to the media booth.
Okay, so you actually could see.
We could see through the glass, see him talking to Ned and hear the words because they were, of course, piping the radio broadcast into us. So it wasn't hard at all to watch him and Ned, go back and forth.
I would assume that you had to work after the race and didn't get to go to the big legendary picnic.
Yeah, it might be surprising to you, but I did have to work. And nearly all of us in the press box were typing away when the big, lunch was going on. We only saw pictures of it, at least I did, but it was there was a shot of President Reagan sitting down, and I think Bobby Allison and Richard Petty were on either side of him, and they were eating Kentucky Fried Chicken at that picnic there.
Nothing more NASCAR at that time than Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Chicken Bone Alley.
Here's an interview with Steve from MRN's broadcast of a 1988 race at Michigan. Honestly, I wanted to include it just because it's such an outstanding needle in a haystack find from my friend Al Kenny's massive archive.
Now, Steve Waid, who is one of the most respected writers on the Grand National Scene paper, he started it up in Roanoke, Virginia, and he remembers his first race. He came down to Martinsville, and he said, boy, was I a rookie at the time.
Back in 1971, Barney, the first race I ever saw was at Martinsville, where I happened to be working at the time, and, you talk about a lost soul. I was out there watching these cars running around and around. I had no idea who was leading the race or anything. If I hadn't had the people there who worked in public relations and they're guiding us with everything, I don't know that I could have, covered it accurately at all. As it turned out, I wrote the story as I saw it, and I wrote it the way that it happened, nothing fancy, and got the job done. But I found out one thing. In my experiences in sports at the time, I'd never been where they brought the winner to the press box situation, and everyone could ask him the questions until they were finished. And you could get pretty much the information you needed in full without having to hunt, without having to stand in line, without having to wait on them to open up a locker room door. So it was right away I found out that racing was just a little bit different thing for a man to cover.
His paper, Grand National Scene, has become the #1 racing paper in the country as far as Winston Cup coverage is concerned. He's been pleasantly surprised by that.
Yes, I have. I thought that the growth would be steady, and I thought it would be a reasonably good growth, but we have really skyrocketed, and I'm really pleased at that. I think the reason for it, if I had to put my finger on it, was that it's not that just we report the news. The goal of Grand National Scene is to get behind the scenes and, above all else, to introduce the fan to the people and the sights he's not able to see from the grandstands. We do a lot of candid photos. We do a lot of photos in the garage area. We talk to men who just have weekend jobs as much as we talk to the superstars. So we like to think that by presenting the behind-the-scenes material and the overall view, not just the highlights, not just the basic news of the day, we can interest more readers, interest more people in the publication, and I think it's worked for us that way.
And Waid, too, is a race fan at heart.
Yeah, I really am. I have to say that I enjoy the sport, I enjoy the people, but I think that if I didn't know them like I do, I would still go to a race and sit there and watch it, because I think it gets more reaction out of people over a longer period of time than any other sport I can think of. Baseball has its moments, certainly football does, certainly ice hockey does. But if you think about it, and you sit there and watch racing, there is so much you can watch during one race and that you can follow. So many cars, you can watch pit stops, you can watch anything you want for several hours. And I think that's the main appeal to the sport.
One of Steve's biggest strengths as a journalist was his ability to relate to so many different types of personalities throughout the garage, from the top of the running order all the way to the back markers, the guys just trying to make it from race to race. Everybody knew Steve Waid. Steve covered the first start of Dale Earnhardt's Winston Cup career to his last, and every mountain and valley in between. Out of Dale's 76 Winston Cup wins, Steve wrote the scene race lead for more than 40, and he was at the track for most of the others.
Tell me about the Dale Earnhardt that you knew, not the 7-time champion, not the driver, but tell me about Dale Earnhardt, the person.
All right, I learned from him basically that if he liked you, he was a true friend. In other words, he was not just an associate. And the proof of that to me came when I moved to Concord in 1981. I'd covered Dale since his start, 3 or 4 years ago. And at the time, his Rod Osland days and all that sort of thing. So I was moving to Concord, and I was staying with a friend of mine for 3 months until school was over and my family could come down. Earnhardt found out about that. And he said, wait a minute. He said, come to my house right now. So I drove to his house, and I walked in, and he showed me the entire lower level of the house. He said, you can live here. You got your own private bathroom, your own bedroom, things of that nature, and your own private entrance. Now, imagine a champion of this sport asking a rider to do the same today.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, though, you turned him down. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. I was very tempted to do that. And I said, Dale, I really, really appreciate this, but you have to understand it's not good for the editor of a racing newspaper to be living with the champion. And he understood.
That right there speaks volumes about the relationship that you had. You were friends, but you still maintained a sense of professional.
Yeah, he knew the difference.
Yeah.
He knew the difference. And, when we were at the racetrack, sure, we used to have lunch together in his hauler and talk everything but racing. We talk politics, we talk current events, things of that nature, which I always like to do with drivers. I got a lot of stories about talking to drivers about things that don't have anything to do with stock car racing. But then when the competition began and the grind of the race and preparation and the race itself went on, I was obligated to ask him questions he may not like to hear, like what happened out there, that sort of thing. But he always answered it, deliberately and honestly, and because I think he realized we had jobs to do. We could be friends, but we had jobs to do. And back in those days, Rick, I can't impress upon you enough how much that type of relationship existed among media members and selected race drivers all the way down the line. The race drivers themselves and the team owners, they respected the honest journalists, the guys who were fair. And by being fair, I mean, when there was a controversy, you not only printed one side of the story, you printed the other. And they understood that. So they were never really afraid or worried to be talking with you.
Well, that's the thing that I enjoyed about covering the Busch Series for Winston Cup Scene, because at that time, the Busch Series, from what I understand, was at a point that the Winston Cup division had been several years before, because I was afforded the opportunity to forge a relationship with both sides. And I remember very vividly being able to go, after Buckshot Jones and Randy LaJoy had one of their many, many run-ins, I was able to go to Randy and I was able to go to Buckshot.
Yeah, sure.
And I was able to get both sides of the story.
Right.
And, what was it like for you watching Dale's star begin to rise? Because I can't imagine, I assume that you saw him in his bread and water days.
Yeah.
And you also knew him as a 7-time champion. What was it like to watch that rise?
It was impressive to me, very impressive, because I could say and print what I knew to be the truth about his rise, and which was, this is a guy who sacrificed when he was very young, had nothing, troubled marriages, trying to make it in racing, whatever you want to say. He started out racing for independent team owners just to make a name for himself, got hooked up with Rod Osland and won Rookie of the Year and a championship in successive seasons, 79, 80, and then went on to experience the horrid feeling that his team collapsed underneath him. Osland pulled out, and the team was bought by Jim Stacy. At that time, a shady character.
Yeah.
And Earnhardt quit because he didn't want to drive for Stacy. Now, you would have thought that this could have been a man who came and went in the sport fast. Just a puff of smoke and then in the breeze he's gone. No. Fortunately for him, he had the name and the talent, and he had Wrangler sponsorship to go out and seek another ride that could carry him forward. And that was Richard Childress. We all know what's happened since that particular time. He did spend a couple of years with Bud Moore, but it came back to Richard Childress, and those guys, achieved history. So look at the effort that he made, look at where he came from, and look where he went to. You can't help but admire it. You can't help but say this is not anybody who was given anything. He did it on his own.
As time progressed, he obviously became far more successful than anybody could have ever imagined. And by the time I broke into the sport in late 1994 full time, he had just clinched his 7th championship. And to put it nicely, I didn't have that kind of relationship with Dale Sr. I never got behind that veil. On a couple of occasions, he was pretty much flat out rude.
Yeah.
Was there ever a point where you went to him and said, hey, you've got too big a shell, or was that something that you just let alone?
I never recall saying anything like that to him. It's because I never experienced it with him, and maybe that I should have realized where that shell was and how he could be, and he could be that. I had seen him of that, but I never really recognized it on my own part because our relationship was so much different. I mean, yeah, he won his 7th championship, and he was up there in New York, and he was in the presidential suite, as you might imagine, and he invited only a handful of writers to come up and join him and have an exclusive interview. Might have been 5 of us. We conduct the interview. Oh, I gotta tell you, Rick, this was a major league interview.
Yeah.
He had 2 butlers there, had food spread out,
Yeah.
anything you want to drink, that sort of thing. And we had the interview, and he was sitting in the Kennedy rocking chair as he conducted that interview with the 5 of us. And after it was over, we thanked him, and we all started to leave. And he said, wages. He always called me wages for some reason. Hold up. Don't go. Come back and let's talk. So I went back and we sat down on the couch together. And as we usually do, we talked about politics and we talked about current events and that nature. And, we weren't always in agreement when it came to politics. Dale was pretty conservative, but we enjoyed the talk together.
If Steve knew and liked Dale Earnhardt, he and Alan Kulwicki were tight.
The other person that I wanted to ask you about, and it's because of a column that you wrote after his tragic plane crash, but you wrote a column after Alan Kulwicki died. I think a lot of people considered Alan a little bit strange, very quiet, very reserved, but that isn't the Alan Kulwicki that you described in that column. You knew, again, like you knew Dale Earnhardt and you knew Richard Petty, you knew Alan Kulwicki, the person, and not Alan Kulwicki, the driver.
I did, and I really can't remember how it started other than the fact that we clicked. Now, by the time Alan came along, shall we say I had a certain statute in the sports stature, and not bragging, but it reached a point where young guys who came into the sport knew me, knew me right away by name at least. So when I got to talking with them, I was able to find out a few more things than other people would have, and we just clicked. Now, Alan indeed seemed strange to everybody in the garage area. Nobody took a briefcase to the racetrack, for example, and everybody said, "There's no way this kid is going to make it running his own team." And, I sort of agreed with that, but I was just going to see how far it went. Well, after a while, I forgot about watching him trying to make it as opposed to being his friend. When I say friend, it was beyond the usual racetrack association. In other words, I went to his place and several times he came to mine. When's the last time a race driver came to your house? That type of thing. He even let my wife borrow his racing uniform for Halloween.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did she still got it?
No. Well, we had to give that one back. But, yeah, she's walking around with our kids going trick-or-treating with a Xerec uniform on. So that was the kind of a relationship I had with Alan. And there are things about him that I've already mentioned seem strange to others, but as you watched him, there weren't any strange. They were right on target to being successful. One thing people didn't he was very smart. He was college educated, and he was self-driven. Alan Kulwicki had, I'll give you an example, a booklet of inspirational sayings, and he read one of those every day. And I thought, who does that? But that was to, obviously to inspire himself, but to get ideas of how to get better and how to improve. Now, the only downside to Alan was he was a perfectionist. He absolutely had to have it done his way. And a lot of people thought, well, that's kind of a bad thing. But you know what? For him and his team, his way was the right way. And if you didn't accept his way, you weren't there very long. Go ask Ray Evernham. I think he lasted 3 races or something like that. But of course, he was the great crew chief in his own right. But so Alan developed his team and his championship by doing things his way and being the perfectionist that he was. But he was also a very funny guy. I asked him one time, I said, well, Alan, what it is about you? And he said, I'm just a collection of noble attributes. And I said, you gotta be kidding me. So when, I'll give you another example of how he was determined to do it his way. Junior Johnson offered him a ride. And Junior told me, he said, if you get Alan Kulwicki on my team, I don't need a general manager anymore. And he was right.
Wow. I hadn't thought of it that way.
You had a general manager built in. Alan said no. Alan said, I've got a sponsor. And Junior told him, no, you don't have that sponsor. Yes, I do, and I'm going to go out and do it my way. Well, that sponsor was Maxwell House, and they went to Junior. And Junior did have that sponsor. Didn't slow Alan down a bit. And as we all know, and I don't have to tell you because you wrote the book, his strategy in that race that won him the 92 championship was brilliant. There's no doubt about it. It was brilliant. Yeah, he had some luck on his side. For example, Davey being taken out in a wreck, that didn't hurt him a single bit. But by the same token, his strategy was brilliant to win that championship. And I think that was the final proof that he could use his intelligence, his perfectionism, and his own talent to do things his way. And he won a championship doing it his way. And guess who he beat? Junior Johnson. So it's pretty ironic.
When he was going through all that with Junior, obviously you had to interview him about, all his options and everything like that. But off the record, did he ask you what you thought?
Yeah, he did. And I gave him the wrong answer too many times. I told him, I said, why do you want to continue to suffer and struggle with doing this every single day when the burden could be taken off of you? Imagine what you could be if you were just the driver. And for a guy like Junior Johnson, he said, my problem is I don't want to be just the driver. He said, I want to be able to control my own destiny. And you really can't do that even when you're driving for a man and a team as talented and well-known as Junior Johnson. So I said, okay, well, try it your way. And, of course, he did, as you well know, and he was extremely successful.
Steve was named the 2018 recipient of the Squire Hall Award for NASCAR Media Excellence the week after the first episode of the Scene Vault podcast dropped. Of all the awards that Steve ever won, the Squire Hall represented the highlight of his career.
Steve, it is a shame that we don't have anything to talk about going on in your life this past week.
No, we haven't got a thing. I can't come up with anything. I'm sorry. I just don't know what to tell you.
It's just been another average, boring week for you, huh?
Absolutely. Not a thing happened. I don't know what's wrong.
In all seriousness, Steve, you were named this year's recipient of the Squire Hall Award for Excellence in NASCAR Journalism, Motorsports Journalism. And that is basically the equivalent of the Ford C. Frick Award in baseball. It doesn't make you a member of the NASCAR Hall of Fame, but you will be honored by the NASCAR Hall of Fame.
Well, honored is the right word, because I can tell you, Rick, I am really, really honored to receive this award. You know, I guess I'm also saying that it serves as a recognition of the work that I've done. I'm not, any kind of media giant by any imagination, being stretch imagination, but to have your work recognized in this fashion is very, very humbling. And I might add also that is what even more humbling is the responses and congratulations and the kind words I've received from hundreds of fans and readers and people who have seen my work over the years, and that's really, really special.
First of all, how did you find out that you had received the award? Was it something that you might have known was coming through the pipeline?
I had no idea.
Really?
I got a phone call right out of the blue from Mike Helton, the vice chairman of NASCAR, and he told me that I had won that award, and I actually made him repeat it. I said, wait a minute, what'd you say, Mike? And he repeated it, sure enough, and we giggled about that a little bit. And I thought it was very special that he would take the time to call me and let me know that I had won the award. And he even told me himself he wanted to be the one to tell me. I've known Mike many years, of course, and that was very, very special.
Now, you mentioned the congratulations that you had received in some of the notes and everything. Is there maybe one or two that stand out?
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, Tom Jensen, now working at the NASCAR Hall of Fame, he was with Scene for several years as editor. He ran the show, and he called me. He took the time to call me and tell me his congratulations, and then he posted a congratulatory message on Facebook, which there triggered the reactions from many, many other people. And I also got a message from Tom Roberts, longtime PR man in
TR.
PR, that's him. In Guntersville, Alabama. He gave me sent me a message, rather, and he worked with Alan Kulwicki for several years, as you well know. And, of course, Alan is going into the Hall of Fame in this next enshrinement ceremony. And, of course, I'll be there to receive my award as well. And I was a good friend of Alan's as well. So Tom, TR, he pointed out that it was going to be a very, very, very special celebration for him because not only is Alan going in, but a good friend of his, me, was going in. And I go in. It's pretty special to go in with someone like Alan that I knew very well.
Getting an honor like that, I would assume you've had a chance to reflect on what it means to you personally. What does it mean to you personally?
Well, as I said earlier, it means a recognition of my work. That's the main thing about it. And it's also was very special to me is that all of these years that I worked in the sport, I had no idea, what kind of honors, if any, I would receive. And now, when this comes up, and it's very, humbling experience to have it. The other thing that impresses me is that so many people read and liked my work over the years, enough to send me congratulatory messages, and I don't even know them personally at all. And that's another aspect of winning this award that it means a lot to me. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is your longevity and your production means something to people. That's the best thing.
Now, I'm sure that it's no coincidence that you appear on the first episode of the Scene Vault podcast, and then all of a sudden, you get this big award. You do realize that this puts you right over the top, right?
Oh, yeah. The podcast did it, no question about it.
That one episode with Steve became two episodes became 2 years, then 200 episodes. We made it this close to 400 shows together. Steve's last episode on the podcast, and I had not realized this until just this very second. His last episode was episode 398, our tribute to Kyle Busch. And honestly, I don't remember how far into our run it was that he agreed to continue serving as co-host. We decided that he'd just keep doing it. He'd just keep doing the podcast and see how it goes. And I hope you'll agree, but I think it went pretty doggone well. My friend, working with you on this show was the highlight of my motorsports career. I love you, boss man.